It's been 7 years since regular show had its grand finale, but the show's fandom is alive and well, so today we're ranking all the characters from worst to best with a regular show tier list. With how lighthearted and absurd regular show is, there aren't any characters we outright hate.
Oh, how do you watch that? It's like barfing rainbows in my eye.
As a result, we're going to start with C tier for the characters who weren't particularly impressive, whether it's due to a little bit of annoyance or just wasted potential. After doing some thinking, we've decided that the lowest spot on our list belongs to Thomas, aka Nikolai. Now, regular show is a bizarre series, but even by its standards, Thomas stands out. He debuts in Exit 9B as a new park intern, and while this intro episode is one of the best in the whole series, he really is just there. Thomas's everyman personality makes him likable, but seldom funny, and that's when he actually gets any screen time. And it's a good thing he wasn't a better straight man character, because 2 seasons later, he was revealed to be a Russian spy called Nikolai in a plot twist that came quite literally out of nowhere. It wasn't actively foreshadowed. I mean, how could it have been with how little screen time he got? And while the special itself where this is revealed isn't bad, it's not even remotely good enough to make up for this absolute character assassination. Thomas is a nice enough dude, but he's easily regular show's least impressive character. Up next we have the unicorns. These literal party animals came from a pretty fun episode, but their douchiness loses them a lot of points on a list like this. You know how Rigby in season 1 of regular show was, like, a huge jerk? Yeah, these guys are basically him without any of his good qualities. Sure, they're loyal to their own, but that doesn't change the fact that anyone who's not a unicorn chanting "bro" perpetually is fair game for some pretty abusive pranks. Like, Rigby was a jerk in these early episodes, but even he felt bad when he saw Benson tied up and basically assaulted by these guys. Man, I hope he had someone to talk to about that. In third to last place, we have a pretty divisive supporting character, Party Horse. Like the unicorns, he only appears in a handful of episodes, and those episodes themselves are also divisive. Like Starla, he's a very simple character. A horse who likes to party, from a planet full of horses who like to party, that for some reason has a high school with a focus on US history. It's probably the most on-the-nose episode of regular show, to the point where it honestly feels like a parody of itself. Now, Party Horse is an alright dude for the most part, but he's really just repeating the same joke over and over again. The humor with him comes from just how bizarre he is and his whole planet is, which the show makes cracks about, but if you ask us, a character like Party Horse would have been better suited to running gag appearances rather than whole episodes about him. We don't dislike him, but he can be a bit grating, but props to him for being responsible for what's probably one of the best exchanges in the whole series. Can we get a zingo for our next character, Quips? No? Okay, that's fine. I didn't really want to say it either. I'm just contractually obligated to. Quips is Skips' cousin, who's basically characterized by his tendency to tell cheesy jokes 24/7, much to the annoyance of everyone around him. He's definitely the most annoying character in the series, but we give him some credit still because he's at least, kind of supposed to be. Regardless, it takes great skill to pull off a character whose personality is annoying but not malicious. And while Quips isn't the worst, he's just not memorable enough to overcome his more annoying aspects. Heck, even the episode description on Hulu got his name wrong. Good luck telling your cousin tips to stop telling bad jokes, Skips. Now we have the first of many, many love interests, Celia. Right off the bat, we don't have anything bad to say about Celia, despite her low placement. In season 5, the writers decided that High Five Ghost didn't deserve to be the only guy in the friend group who didn't have a love interest. So they introduced Celia, and the rest was history. Well, more accurately, that's pretty much all the history she has. She's a nice character, and her relationship with Fives is sweet, but she lacks much of a personality and is really only defined by her relationship with him. Though Fives deserves happiness, so we're glad she's here regardless. In a similar vein, next we have Audrey. She acts as Benson's first love interest, but she doesn't get much screen time either, which is disappointing since it would have been nice to see more of Benson's life outside of work. Sadly, after she sends him to Dumptown, USA, we never really see her again, but at least we'll always have the memories. Like when she... did she do anything else? Let's just move on. Now, don't tell Muscle Man about this, but we've decided to give the last C-tier spot to his girlfriend, Starla. The muscle woman to Muscle Man, Starla's personality basically begins and ends with her being Mitch's girlfriend. Most of the humor from her character is gross out due to the sheer energy of her relationship with Mitch. To quote Rigby on this one, are people even allowed to do that to each other? You'd think that being basically a female Muscle Man would be a sure ticket to a higher spot on the list, but Starla does little to differentiate herself as her own character. She's a loving girlfriend and has a few funny moments, but she's sadly overshadowed by her legend of a husband, who we'll get to later. For now, it's time to move into the characters who aren't quite the MVPs of the series, but are memorable enough to still have a place in our hearts. This is the B tier. Kicking off the B tier, we have a 5-way tie between some of the major new characters from the series' final stretch. Pam, Dr. Langer, Chance Shoreshot, Toothpick Sally, and Colonel Rawls. Remember how we mentioned that introducing a new character into an already fleshed out ensemble cast is a risky move? Yeah, well, take that, make it multiple characters, and have them all play major roles in a final battle that spans the entire last season. We're not saying any of the new characters from the regular show in space arc are bad by any means. In fact, they're pretty decent in their own right. It's nice for Benson to have a new love interest in Pam, and Dr. Langer's shift from seeming like a villain to a surprisingly useful ally was at least interesting. They are fine in their own right, but these characters are a bunch who just don't have enough time to shine for us to put them on quite the same level as the Park Gang. Up next, we have the iconic Death Kwon-do Sensei. Probably best known for his brief appearance in Death Punchies, one of the classics of the series. When he's not running his noble sandwich shop, he's teaching the ancient art of Death Kwon-do. It's a deadly martial artistry that allows the user to perform powerful jumps, punches, kicks, and even bowel movements, so long as they have a mullet and a pair of jean shorts on. The concept of Death Kwon-do in general is pretty neat, to the point where it's even brought back a few times later in the series. Even someone as hefty as the Sensei or tiny as Rigby can master it with the right style. That creativity gives him a decent spot on our list, as does his iconic "No!" Next, we have the Yin to Fives' Yang Low 5 Ghost. While he rarely shows up, which is going to be a big theme in this tier for the most part, Low 5 Ghost is a pretty great brother. We're most impressed with his role in Celio's debut episode, where he used his position as a police officer to help Fives track down his lost love. Also, fun fact, he's voiced by Roger Craig Smith, who plays Sonic the Hedgehog in most of the modern games and shows. Next is Skips' dearly departed lover, Mona. Over the course of the series, Skips drops a few hints here and there about his origin story, and it eventually comes up that he once loved a woman named Mona. They fell in love as schoolmates, with Mona helping him to reform his ways and be less prone to fighting. While she's far from the most fleshed out character, she is largely responsible for one of the best character arcs and specials of the whole series. May she rest in peace. Honestly, as much as we love a good villain, part of us feels wrong putting Clordbane the Destroyer higher than his victim. Nonetheless, his villainous nature is the whole reason Skips is the immortal hero we know him as today. Just as this big bully of a baby is about to strike Skips down, Mona sacrifices herself and takes the final blow. But even Skips defeating him wouldn't be the last we'd see of him. Every 157 years, he fights Skips over and over in an effort to join the Guardians of Eternal Youth. We'd love to place him higher, but sadly he rarely shows up, which is a shame, because Clordbane could have been a pretty great recurring antagonist if they'd used him more. Another Umbrella entry is next. Gary, Tecmo, and the Guardians of Eternal Youth. These guys are all Skips' supernatural buddies who show up every so often to help him and the gang out of a jam. Well, occasionally they might be the cause of said jam, but still, these guys made their mark by helping flesh out the already bizarre world of regular show, pushing it from just pretty darn weird into full-on supernatural territory. Gary is basically David Bowie if David Bowie was under the command of a team of supernatural babies, whereas Tecmo specializes in technology and even kind of time traveled at one time. No amount of explanation could even begin to make any of that make sense, but they show up just enough to make a mark without forcing you to think too hard about it. And as long as we're bringing up Supernatural, closing out B tier is Anti-Pops. Like most of the first entrants of this category, Anti-Pops is a character who wasn't introduced until the 8th and last season of the show. As such, we didn't get much time with him to grow particularly attached, but he at least was a threat who made for a pretty intense final conflict. His final battle with Pops was something to behold, even if we didn't know he existed until like 20 episodes ago, but even though he made for a pretty good pure evil type villain, we still have to dock him points for being the reason Pops had to die in order to save the universe. No amount of epic final battles will ever make us forgive you for that, Anti-Pops. It's enough to cut him off from our next category. We're starting to get into the heavy hitters. These are the A-tier characters. Stepping onto the next category are the baby ducks. Honestly, what can we say about these little guys? They're adorable baby ducks who were left behind in a fountain only to be restored to their home by Mordecai and Rigby. In a show of total whiplash, they reveal at the end of their debut episode that they can talk, and if that weren't weird enough, in the eventual sequel, A Bunch of Full-Grown Geese, they return to form a gigantic Power Rangers-esque transformation to save the park from those nasty geese. Okay, and alright, we've got a lot of explaining to do here, but somehow making it all the way to A tier is Margaret. Really, we shouldn't make a big deal of placing Margaret here because no matter where we put her, it'd be controversial. There are people who genuinely like Margaret, and people who really, really hate her. And despite her position here, you might be surprised to hear that we really don't like her. We don't hate her by any means, but she's just honestly a one-note character, only really existing to be Mordecai's on and off love interest. Even when the two become actual friends as the series progresses, she doesn't doesn't really have much of a personality of her own, and even when she does have her own thing, being a journalist, it's ironically nothing particularly newsworthy. I mean, good for her, but when you're part of a show that has Super Saiyan lollipops and Power Ranger ducks, becoming a good journalist is far from as interesting as it gets. She's generally less of a character and more of a plot device, and it was especially hard to like her when she started to come between Mordecai and CJ. You know, when Mordecai was finally moving on. So, with all that negativity, how could we possibly put her all the way up here? That's easy. While, sure, Margaret is far from the most likable character, the sheer amount of drama her existence stirs up at least made episodes with her interesting. And honestly, in the first 2 seasons especially, the sheer amount of thirst Mordecai had for this woman was downright hilarious. And frankly, we wouldn't have it without her, so she does deserve some credit. The namesake of one of the series' most iconic episodes, Party Pete, is next. Party Horse was alright, I guess, but he pales in comparison to the sheer partying power of Party Pete. I mean, this guy has such raw partying energy that he can turn into a freaking disco ball if you just give him $8 and some decades-old soda. What makes him stand out is that Party Pete isn't even some bizarre villain. He's straight up hired by Mordecai and Rigby to spruce up their shindig. Later, he's given a return, despite his seeming explosion in his debut episode, and it's revealed that that Party Pete was actually a clone made by a company who clones other party animals and keeps their original people in tubes. Now that is some classic regular show weirdness right there. And even as an adult, it's still hard to not laugh at this obese, pimp suit wearing man turning into an inflated disco ball. Up next, we have the park's owner, Mr. Maylard. He's Benson's boss and Pops' adopted father, in addition to the owner of the park as a whole. While he runs a tight ship, is greedy, and all around a pretty unpleasant guy, to say the least, Maylard is at least a good source of conflict whenever he shows up. Since the earlier episodes often played Benson up as the main antagonist of sorts, Maylard was an interesting shakeup who kept even him on his toes. What elevates him all the way up here, however, is his relationship with Pops. It's revealed in the final season that Maylard adopted Pops in an effort to give him a happy life on Earth, seeing that his destiny was supposedly to save the universe. There's something endlessly heartwarming about a character who, despite being generally mean and unpleasant, at least loves their family above all else. That paternal love gives Maylard a lot of points in our book. Next, we have one of the many incarnations of the Grim Reaper in animation, Death. Making Skips immortal was already a cool choice, but having the literal Grim Reaper be his arch rival as a result? Man, that's clever, and with an excellent vocal performance by Julian Holloway, Death is elevated that much further. While he's definitely a villain whenever he shows up, it's not by sheer malice, he's just doing his job and taking whatever souls come his way. Death can raise the stakes of any situation, whether it's holding Muscle Man's soul as leverage to get free babysitting out of Mordecai and Rigby, or making a deal to try and get Skips' immortal soul, and sometimes a few others along the way. Hey, in Rigby's defense, that soul ball really is cool. Speaking of deadly villains, though, next is Mr. Ross. Honestly, look, we don't have some insanely deep reason for why he's here. It's really just the sheer contrast of how petty Mr. Ross is and how insane the destruction he causes is. Imagine planning to tear apart the fabric of space and time and then destroy the entire freaking universe because some kid ruined your team's chance to win a volleyball game. You do realize that destroying the universe means that you won't even have a volleyball team to coach anymore, much less a championship to win? Alright, well, honestly, the movie was just really good, and we wouldn't have it without this petty son of a gun, so props to him. Now we have another joint entry, GBF and GBF Jr. It's no secret that these two are among the most memorable antagonists of the show's history. Fun fact, they're also the main villains of the regular show 3DS game Mordecai and Rigby in 8-bit land. Also, fun fact, screw these guys and screw their final boss fight because that was actual torture. Oh yeah, the characters. The episodes they head up are really good. Making GBF himself based on the former world record holder for Donkey Kong is one of the most regular show things to ever regular show, and it aged like fine wine since it turns out the guy was a fraud. As for Junior, there's something hilarious about a guy trying to destroy your whole world just because you beat his dad at a video game. Coffee, 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 coffee guy. Sometimes art simply speaks for itself. Bravo, GG Quintel. Before we enter the top 10, we're gonna give some sugar to Rigby's younger, believe it or not, brother, Don. The main reason Don is this high is because he's just a swell guy all around. Aside from being described design-wise by the creator himself as Rigby on steroids, he's pretty much the polar opposite of his bro. He's nice, helpful, hardworking, and absolutely jacked. Despite being the younger brother, Don is always there for Rigby when he needs him, no matter how awful Rigby usually treats him. You can't choose your brothers, but if you could, well, we think we know who we'd go with. Next up, we have our personal favorite villains from the series, the Capicola Gang. And before anyone says it, the episode Fuzzy Dice, where these guys made their first appearance, came out 2 years before Five Nights at Freddy's. In other words, regular show walked so FNAF could run. Except regular show also ran because these guys are without a doubt some of the funniest, most bizarre foes Mordecai and Rigby have faced off against. Despite appearing to be just your average everyday animatronics in a Chuck E. Cheese ripoff, they revealed themselves to be jewel thieves hiding in plain sight until the statute of limitations on their theft ran out. But story beats don't really matter. What matters is that there's a talking robot bear, gopher, and bird. They act like mob members and they have machine guns. A freaking SWAT team gets involved and shoots them with a rocket launcher, yet they still survive and return as villains later on in Stake Me Amadeus. Really, relationship drama aside, these guys stole both episodes they were part of in way few other one-off characters have. Now we finally have the first member of the main park gang and Muscleman's ride or die, High Five Ghost. Fives is unfortunately the lowest of the main 7 park members due to a lack of real depth to his character. And no, we aren't just saying that because we can literally see through him, haha. Rather, Fives rarely gets any focus in the story. The one major exception was his episode about finding Celia, and while that was nice, it's still nowhere near the levels of depth the other characters get. But as for his good traits, Five is just a nice dude all around. He's always willing to help others to the best of his ability, and every so often he gets a bit of his own characterization, from his love of music to his surprising amounts of sensitivity on occasion. That said, I have a personal beef with Fives. In the episode Jinxed, Rigby's trying to get unjinxed so Mordecai will stop flat out bullying him. He runs into Fives, who's also jinxed, and despite the risk he himself takes in doing so, Rigby unjinxes him. Then Fives just runs away. He could have unjinxed Rigby, but he just doesn't. The sense of betrayal I felt in that moment never really went away. Anyway, to close out A tier, we have Mordecai's other, and better, love interest, CJ. If we had a Cartoon Fumblers Hall of Fame, Mordecai would not only be in it, he would be the hall itself. CJ, unlike Margaret, has an actual personality aside from girl. She's incredibly short-tempered, which causes strain in the relationship, but then again, so do Mordecai's struggles to express his feelings openly, and of course his tendency to get hung up on the past. CJ was a great character, and honestly, we would have loved for her and Mordecai to end up together. But you just had to hijack your friend's wedding. You know who else just had to hijack their friend's wedding? No? Oh, well, in the meantime, before that question gets answered, we've finally reached the GOATs. Wait, Thomas isn't here. The best characters in the series. These are the S-tier characters, the ones who carried the show and made sure it was anything but regular. First up, we have the best of the female characters, Eileen. Like Margaret and Starla, she's mainly characterized by her relationship with her significant other, in her case, that being Rigby. But unlike them, she actually warrants this characterization by having such a unique personality that contrasts Rigby's and a purpose in his story arc. It's no secret that Rigby went from a total jerk to a pretty decent guy over the course of the series, and that's mostly thanks to Eileen, who liked him at his worst and loved him into being a better person. Mordecai may be Rigby's best friend, but Eileen is there for him just as much. We see him steadily go from completely disregarding Eileen and being outright mean to her, to tolerating her, to becoming friends, and to them basically becoming crazy about each other by the latter half of the series. When he struggles to do a pull-up for a fitness test, who's there for him? Eileen! And slowly but surely he becomes a more considerate, hard-working, all-around likable guy. As for Eileen herself, even before the whole Rigby character development arc, she was just plain adorable. From her love of sea turtles to her insane shyness around Rigby, Eileen is a gem and must be treasured at all costs. And seriously, mad respect for having her whole motivation be, I can fix him, and then she actually does it. Okay, let me be the first to say it feels wrong to put Mordecai outside of the top 5. As you can probably guess, he's this low not because of any glaring character flaws, but because the others after him are just that good. Nonetheless, Mordecai is the closest thing the series has to a true main character, and he definitely earns that role. One of the best things about looking at a regular show from a slightly more grown-up perspective is seeing that while Rigby's definitely immature, Mordecai is just as flawed and immature as him, and in terms of relationships, even more so. The sheer amount of awkwardness Mordecai exudes when within 10 feet of a woman is as endearing as it is honestly hilarious. While some find it easy to hate on Mordecai for his unrivaled simping tendencies, if anything, it makes him a more brutally honest depiction of just how weird of a time the early 20s are, especially in regards to maturity and relationships. He's still a reliable friend at the end of the day, even if he's got more than a few sins under his belt. No, we haven't forgotten about him impulsively killing Rigby in It's Time. You know who else hasn't forgotten about him impulsively killing Rigby in It's Time? My mom! Oh, and Muscleman. Mitch Muscleman Sorenstein began the series as a recurring gag character who would tell his iconic "my mom" jokes ad nauseum, There's something innately charming about just how wrong he tells the joke and how angry he gets when someone points it out. Really though? Just let him enjoy his jokes, Mordecai. While he may seem obnoxious, and frankly he is to a degree, Muscle Man is still a great friend and husband, always there for his loved ones when it counts, even if his short temper and lack of tact can make him pretty insensitive at times. But really, the main reason he's so high up is because he's easily one of the funniest characters in the cast, and Sam Marin's vocal performance is probably the most memorable in the show. Just outside of the top 3 is Mordecai and Rigby's knight in butt fur-covered armor, Skips. If you've ever tried anything and everything to get rid of your problems, try the foolproof Skips way. Skips seems to know a way out of literally every situation. Granted, this makes sense considering he's like multiple centuries old, but it's still funny that every situation, no matter how bizarre, is practically completely normal in Skips' eyes. Skips is great not just because of his role as the park's permanent wise old man figure, but because of the fact that he's such a genuinely nice guy. I mean, he literally almost got murdered by the manifestation of his own stress because he wouldn't give himself a break. I guess when you're immortal, you see no reason not to help your buddies out of any mess they get themselves into. Respectable. We've finally reached the top 3, and believe us when we say these guys were really tough to rank. Benson is taking home our bronze medal of greatness. As a kid, it's easy to look at Benson as the old stick-in-the-mud boss who's always ruining Mordecai and Rigby's fun, but it's actually really rare for this to be the truth, or at least the whole truth. Think about it. He might yell a lot, but how many times have Rigby and Mordecai utterly destroyed the park only to be simply reprimanded by Benson? They've given him seriously valid reasons to fire them, but he gives them chance after chance, and considering the messes they cause, kaboom! That makes him a really solid, forgiving boss. On top of that, Benson is also a very nuanced character. By the end of the day, he's genuinely nice and caring when he's not being stressed out by his work, mainly Mordecai and Rigby. He'll take the gang out on mandatory karaoke nights and the like, always doing his best to make sure the park is a fun place to work. He's also at the heart of one of the most gut-wrenching moments in the whole series in the episode Busted Cart, where he lays into Mordecai and Rigby about screwing him out of a job and reveals that that's honestly all he has. This not only lets us see Benson in a new light, but it seems to be the start of Mordecai and Rigby cleaning up their act a little bit, and at least trying to occasionally be decent workers. Speaking of which, while part of us wants to put him at number 1, Rigby takes the silver medal of greatness. Over the course of the series, Rigby goes from a self-described, lovable scoundrel to a surprisingly decent guy. But even before his character development, Rigby's always been arguably the funniest character in the show. The sheer amount of chaos he causes via just not wanting to work is hilarious, from giving Skips an existential crisis by cheating at an arm wrestling match, to getting put in a coma after trying and failing to eat a gigantic omelet despite being allergic to eggs. Rigby's the definition of a lovable jerk, and despite the trouble he constantly causes, one consistent factor is that he does genuinely care about his friends, even if it takes a long time for him to start caring about them more than himself. We mentioned it earlier, but seeing Rigby become a better person was incredibly satisfying, from his relationship with Eileen to his return to high school to finally get his degree. He was at his worst and best during the regular show movie, where it was revealed that he changed Mordecai's acceptance letter to a rejection letter so he wouldn't be left out. As scummy as this was, and it was scummy, the revelation was what finally pushed Rigby to take responsibility for his actions and grow as a person. But the gold medalist of greatness has to be the naive man from Lollyland himself, Pops. While all the characters of regular show are pretty bizarre, Pops takes the cake. He acts as a comic relief who's just so darn happy to be there and wants everyone else to have a good time as well. He's sensitive to the point where Mordecai and Rigby, despite their often douchey tendencies, are always nice to him. Even before regular show existed, Pops was his same naive self, from the shrill British accent to him tipping generously with lollipops. He's an endearing character any way you slice it, and he steals the show anytime he's on screen, but what cements his place at the top of our list is his role in the finale, where he straight up goes Super Saiyan to defeat Anti-Pops, sacrificing himself to save the universe. At least we know that Pops is enjoying and spending all the lollipops he wants to in heaven. All in all, we give Pops 10 butterscotch ripples out of 10.